Hey y'all, this is Mumia Abu Jamal. Welcome to Inside the Activist Studio. Tonight, here at Harlem's historic Schomburg Center, you'll meet a living slice of history. Her name is Ramona Africa, Minister of Communications of the Revolutionary MOVE organization. Remember the infamous police bombing of the MOVE House on May 13, 1985? Well, some of you remember that. Ramona was in that house when police in a copter dropped a bomb on that building. When she was a young student at Temple, she planned on becoming a lawyer. Once she saw what was really happening in court to MOVE members, she dropped those plans quick. When she came and saw not legal theory, but legal tricks, legal repression, legalized brutality against MOVE people, against black people, against poor people, well, to her credit, she didn't turn away. She didn't run away. She stood her ground. Hey, don't let me talk about it. Let her talk about it, right? Welcome to Ramona Africa, Minister of Communications, the MOVE organization.
So Ramona, when and where were you born?
I was born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, born and raised, lived there all my life.
What are your parents' names?
My mother's name is Eleanor. She was a beautician by trade, so when you see my hair, you know that she had a problem with that. I never knew my father. He was a preacher's son who disappeared before I was even born. So I was raised by my mother, my grandmother, aunts.
Well, you told us a little bit about your mom already, but what was it like to be Eleanor Johnson's daughter?
Well, my mother was very attuned to what was, going on around her and everything. She had to work, to take care of herself and me. So she was kind of gone a lot at work, but a lot of people knew her. She knew everybody, at work, in our neighborhood where we lived, she knew everybody. So everybody knew me. And everybody watched out for me, looked out for me, and that was a good thing.
Mm-hmm. You grew up in West Philly in the 1950s and 60s. So what was it like to grow up at that time in that place?
I remember fairly early in my ability to be able to see what was going on. In the 60s, early 60s, I remember the first example of police murder that I was ever aware of. It was a young Muslim brother named Winston 3X Hood, and the cops had stopped him, handcuffed him behind his back, and blew his brains out. That was the first example, and I have never forgotten it. I remember hearing about the Panthers from the beginning. I remember hearing about different people like Malcolm X, Robert Williams, and they fascinated me. I ended up reading books about them. Mm-hmm. The problem is I read about them and I was in accord with them, but it wasn't really real to me. It was something I read about, heard about, and gravitated to, but it wasn't really real to me because I didn't experience it. I read and heard about various other examples of police brutality, police murder, and while I sympathized with the families of, people that had been murdered, and I knew it was wrong. I knew injustice existed, racism existed. It wasn't something that I personally experienced. And I think that was the missing piece of the puzzle, because you can know about something, but it hits home when you experience it personally. I went to Catholic school for 12 years, 1st to 12th grade. And I got my first very clear examples of racism in Catholic school. I was in the 7th grade, maybe, in this Catholic school, Our Lady of Lourdes, and I was a safety. And this one particular day, the safeties were going to another school for some kind of, I guess, citywide meeting or something. And the nun that took care of the safeties, like, was the head of organizing the safeties. She had this meeting after school the day before we left. Now, it was only me and another black girl that were safeties. And the other girl, Teresa, was very fair-skinned. So at this meeting, the nun is walking up and down, because we were sitting in chairs like all the way down one row to it. And she's saying, okay, you know, we're going to this meeting tomorrow. I want everybody to be neat and clean, and I want everybody to look like peaches and cream. And then she stopped at me, looked at me, she said, well, of course you can't look like peaches and cream, but I want you to be neat and, you know, well-dressed and everything. I never forgot that. I'm like, what makes her think I want to look like peaches and cream?
Okay, exactly.
You know? And a second example that really hit home, and I think they really hit home, these examples of racism, because they were in Catholic school with these nuns and priests that were supposed to be godly, you know, exempling their life after God's tradition, you know? And I think that's why it really hit home. I was in the 9th grade at this time, 13, and I'm in religion class. So this young white woman raised her hand, said she had to go to the bathroom. The nun said, okay, you know, go ahead. She came back. A few minutes after that, another young white woman raised her hand and said she had to go to the bathroom. Nun said, okay, you know, go ahead. She comes back. A little while after that, I raised my hand. I said, I have to go to the bathroom. She told me no, that I couldn't go. And I really didn't have a militant bone in my body then. I really didn't. But something clicked when she said no. It like hit me. No, you can't go to the bathroom? Oh, come on now, it's ridiculous. And I got up to walk out. And she said, you walk out of here, don't come back in this class. I was like, whatever, I'm going to the bathroom, you know? So I went to the bathroom, then I went and called my mother on the phone, and then I went to the office, and I sat there and waited for my mother. One last example. I was in the 10th grade, and they wouldn't let us have a black student union, but they let us have, quote, a black studies club. So we would do a program in February in Black History Month every year. This was my first year in the 10th grade. So we did our program. It was on a Friday night and a Saturday night, you know, at the school at West Catholic. We come back to school on Monday, and the principal, a priest, he comes on the loudspeaker and, you know, the PA system, and as usual, he says the morning prayer. He does the Pledge of Allegiance. He makes announcements. And then at the very end, he says, I understand that the program put on by the Black students, the Black Studies Club, was a big success. And I just want to say, welcome to the human race. Oh. Yes, he did. I think some of the nuns were kind of messed up because they had a look on their face like, did he just say that? You know, you could hear a pin drop. Yeah. This was Catholic school, based on religion, on the example of God. So I got some pretty clear examples, you know.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I think being born in 1955 and thinking about all of the historical events at that time, from Emmett Till, we tend to have Montgomery bus boycott, Brown versus Board of Education. We tend to have a Southern perspective on just growing up in a racist environment. So definitely your story is so important. But what was the other side of your teenage years? What was the social side? Like, were you one of the cool kids?
One of the cool sides of it was my mother had me very young, and my aunts were only like maybe 10 years older than me. So when I was 6, they were like 16 and 7. And they loved music. You know, I grew up with music, Motown, you know. When I'm in a car or I hear music, I can like sing the words to almost every song, even though they came out when I was very young, because I heard them when I was very young. And I love that. I love music to this day. I mean, that was a joy. That was being happy growing up, you know, with that music and my family members dancing, and, you know, it was great. I loved it.
That's great. We had a chance to talk to your mom, and she tells a story about something you did in school when you were about 14. So we wanted to hear from your mom and hear an audio of that clip.
And they played the national anthem, and of course she didn't want to stand up. So they came back and they were like, oh, she didn't want to stand up, no. The red, white, and blue, they're not true. Whatever, what 14, 13-year-olds say.
I remember that. What she didn't say is that we were on a military base. She had went to visit one of her friends, you know, and I went with her, and her friends had children that were younger than me, and they asked me to take them to the movies. So I said, okay. So we went to the movies on base, on the military base. And we got, you know, our snacks and went and sat down. And before the movie started, the national anthem came on. I'm like, really? In a movie? You know? And I just sat there. Next thing I knew, somebody was coming, tapping me on my shoulder, talking about, would you come with me, please? And they wanted to know what I was doing on the base, who I was staying with. They wanted all that. But the strange thing was, they didn't put me out the movie. They just told me I had to go sit somewhere else because they didn't want it, like, clear for people to see that they didn't put me out. I mean, if people saw me coming back into the movie, I think they would have known that they didn't put me out. But it was crazy. And I do remember my mother asking me about that. Why didn't I stand up? I'm like, for the national anthem? The red, white, and blue? Never. You know?
Well, you enrolled at Temple University at a time where only 5% of Black people attended college nationwide. When did college come into the picture for you?
Well, I think because of my mother, I always had it in my thinking that I would end up going to college. because she always put in my ear, be a doctor, be a lawyer. You can be what you want to be. You know, I didn't like blood and guts, so I leaned more toward, the legal system. And she would say things like, well, you can be a lawyer, then maybe a judge, maybe the first black woman Supreme Court justice, That's the stuff she was putting in my head. And I leaned toward legality. I was interested in it. But as Mumia said, when I encountered MOVE and the MOVE hearings and MOVE trials, that was a wake-up call for me, an eye-opener, because nothing that I was taught by those professors at Temple University, nothing I read in those textbooks that I was made to read at Temple University, none of that was happening in those courtrooms that I went in personally to see, what was going on. None of it. And I was shocked and shaken. I was like, what? He can't do that. That judge isn't supposed to do that. That prosecutor's not supposed to be doing that. I was shocked.
Now, thinking about what else was going on in the larger society at that time, you were in college in the early 70s, the Vietnam War years, the Black Panther Party was active in Philadelphia. George Wallace, the presidential candidate, was spewing his racial hatred. Were you aware of this world as you were getting into your involvement with MOVE? Did that shape and push you further towards that type of activism?
I was aware of the things you just mentioned. I was aware of Barry Goldwater. I remember a chant that was happening at the time with Barry Goldwater. We need hot water, we need cold water, we don't need no Barry Goldwater, So I was aware of, certain things. I was certainly aware of the Panthers. I was aware of Angela Davis, and the Soul Dad brothers and George Jackson. I was aware of those things. The only part that I really regret, if that's the right word, was that I wasn't more involved. Like I keep saying, I knew about these things, my heart was in the right place, but it did not become real to me until I did get involved. I believe it just wasn't my time before that. I believe that John Africa and this revolution plucked me out of this system at the right time, right before, I would have gone into, really being a lawyer, law school, becoming a lawyer and getting very heavily entrenched in this system. I was plucked from the system during my last year in college. So everything in its time.
What was your impression of Pam Africa when you first met her?
Seriously committed. I remember the first meeting I went to, this friend of mine named Mel called me at work and asked me, did I want to go to this meeting to plan a MOVE demonstration? And I immediately said, yeah, again, because I guess it was time. That was my first introduction to MOVE. And I remember talking to Pam at length. And she was just telling me things about MOVE that I didn't know, confirming other things that I didn't know. And it was Pam who encouraged me to go over to City Hall whenever I could and sit in on the MOVE hearings that were going on, see for myself exactly what was happening, And I did. I saw her as seriously committed. She impressed me. She really impressed me.
So you've already told us a little bit about your interaction with Lynn Abram. Yeah. And it seems like being put into prison with the MOVE sisters really furthered that transformation that you were going into in your life. So that seemed like a really pivotal moment.
Absolutely, it was. I had never been to jail before that. I mean, I had gotten arrested in city council at some demonstration, but all of us that got arrested was released on our own recognizance without having to post bail or anything. And it was just like hours at the Roundhouse, the police administration building. This was 2 months. Move Women just really made an impression on me. And the main impression was the sincerity and genuineness that I saw in them. They weren't no phonies. They truly believed in the teaching of John Africa and were truly committed to doing this work no matter what this system came at them with, you know? I mean, you're talking about women who got beat into miscarriage by cops, you know, beat, stomped, kicked into miscarriage. You're talking about my sister Janine Africa, who had her 3-week-old baby in her arms when Move People had come home from jail on a weekend night, Friday or Saturday night, and they came out to welcome our family home, and cops from 3 different districts, you only live in one police district, cops from 3 different districts came out there talking about they had gotten a call of a disturbance of the peace, and when Move told them it wasn't no disturbance of the peace, we were just welcoming our family home, that there were fraternity houses all around Move headquarters, and they never, ever went to those fraternity houses telling them frat brothers that, you know, they had to take their speakers out the windows, blasting all over the place. They had to stop throwing beer cans out their windows or anything like that. They never did that. But they're going to come up to Move, welcoming our family home, talking about we're disturbing the peace. And when Move came back at them like that, they went crazy. And they start beating Move People and knocked my sister Janine Africa to the ground, knocked her baby out her arms, and trampled him to death. You know, trampled him to death. And nobody ever got charged for that or went to jail. They tried to use the excuse that Move Women have babies naturally at home, so there were no, like, system verification, a birth certificate or whatever. But Move's neighbors, you know, around that area came forward and said, you know, that baby did exist. They saw Janine, you know, throughout her pregnancy and saw the baby. You know? So they couldn't really get away with that, but they didn't do anything about it.
Well, you've spoken a little bit about Move thus far, but we want to really talk about Move in more detail so people can really understand what is this organization about, what are the beliefs, what are the practices, so we have a better understanding of this organization that you've committed your life to.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes. So we want to start with just some basic questions about Move, kind of like a Move 101.
Okay.
Right. So why do Move members wear their hair in locks? How did you wear your hair before Move?
My mother was a beautician by trade, so it was dyed, fried, and laid to the side. That's how I grew up. But not long before Move, after I was a grown woman and did things my way a little bit, I wore an afro, I wore cornrows, and so I changed a little bit there. But wearing my hair like this, Move people don't wear our hair like this as a style or a trend. John Africa coordinated Move, explained to Move that this is truly natural. Wearing an afro, a bush, it's not natural. not for real, because you pick it out. You know, you're doing something to it. I don't have to do anything to my hair. This is the way our true mama, Mother Nature, coordinated our hair. You know, only thing I might do if it clumps up a little bit, separate it. That's it. So that's why we wear our hair like this, because it's natural. We don't feel the need to make our appearance, including our hair, look like somebody else or something that we're not. We're confident, we're secure in the way Mother Nature made us. We don't believe that she makes mistakes. I think that she knows what she's doing and that we don't know how to do it better than Mother Nature. So that's the example we follow. We don't mess with Mother Nature.
And speaking of that, raw and whole foods are all the rage now. Mahmoud has advocated a diet of raw foods since the early 70s. What informed this philosophy?
I'll say the same thing about the raw food that I need to tack on to the thing about the hair. People criticized us and ostracized us for wearing our hair like this. John Africa told us, don't worry about it. Before long, everybody gonna be wearing their hair like this. And what do you see? You see professional football players with their helmets and their locks hanging out. You know, you see all kinds of celebrities, actors, actresses, singers, all kind of people wearing their hair like this, you know. Okay.
Yes.
So the same with the raw food. People criticized us and ostracized us. Like, you can't eat raw food like that. You got to cook it. You're going to make yourself sick. You're going to make your children sick. You can't feed them raw potatoes and, you know, raw food like that. Okay. In 2016, what do you see? Raw food restaurants from the West Coast to the East Coast. So-called nutritionists espousing the benefits of raw food. You know, encouraging people to eat raw food. So you don't see moving toward the system's way. You see those that run this system and those that believe in this system having to acknowledge John Africa's way and move toward that for their own benefit.
Well, when we were interviewing MOVE members, they talked to us about the types of exercises that they did, climbing ropes, throwing balls, etc., which reminded us of CrossFit, which is another kind of contemporary trend. So how does MOVE approach physical fitness?
In a very simple, natural way and from a very early age. Physical activity is definitely part of John Africa's belief because the body is meant to move. It's meant to be active. It's not meant to stagnate, you know? And so John Africa always encouraged us to be active. We didn't walk our dogs. We ran our dogs. Ran them around the block, ran them down the East River Drive. We ran dogs. We didn't just walk them.
Tell us about John Africa. Bring him to life for us.
John Africa is a black man who founded the MOVE organization back in the early 1970s. And exactly where John Africa got his wisdom from, I can't answer that. I do know that from the time he was a child, he did not accept this system. He did not assimilate into this system. They could not make him go to school. I mean, he didn't go past the 2nd or 3rd grade. When he was supposed to go to school, he would go out to the park around trees and grass and life, living things. Like I say, he didn't go past second or third grade. He was illiterate by system standards, could not read or write. So the wisdom that he possessed did not come from this system. He didn't learn it in school or from some ancient philosophy. John Africa was attuned to one thing: the all-importance of life, living things, nothing being more important than that. John Africa had a friend named Donald Glassy, who was a professor at community college. And John Africa would talk to Donald Glassy, who was a white man, about his belief. And Donald Glassy would take notes down, and type it up. And John Africa eventually got Donald Glassy to introduce some of it gradually to his students at community college. And they were very interested. So John Africa started having what were called study sessions at his house. He would have Donald Glassy give these students, excerpts of, his teaching, of the notes that Donald Glassy had typed up. And the students would read it, and then it would be discussed and explained further, and John Africa would, talk about his belief and what those notes actually meant. The first MOVE members were people that came to those study sessions and heard the wisdom of John Africa and, were very interested and kept coming around. Now, one problem began when the media kind of picked up on this group that was forming. And when they got just a little bit attuned to the teaching of John Africa, what John Africa was teaching, they immediately start putting it out there, putting misinformation out there that Donald Glassy was John Africa. Because, of course, this illiterate, uneducated by the system, black man could not possess this wisdom. It had to come from this educated white man. He has to be John Africa, And, MOVE always corrected that whenever it came out. But that's how MOVE started. He never tried to avoid us or avoid helping us, working with us. I could walk in a room where John Africa, was working or something, and he would say, "Hey, sugar, how you doing? How you feeling?" "Oh, I'm good. I'm good." "No, you ain't. What's wrong? What's wrong with you?" And he would sit down and talk to me or whoever it might be. He never tried to get away from us, get around us. The other thing is, unlike any so-called leaders you see in this system, John Africa always, and I mean, MOVE people lived with John Africa from the early 70s up to May 13th of 1985, okay? John Africa always had less in anything material, clothes or whatever, than any of us MOVE members. I mean, he did not care about anything except life. Money, clothing, nothing. John Africa lived with us and lived like us. He didn't live in a mansion on the hill while we lived in the ghetto. John Africa lived with us and like us, didn't encourage us to give money or collect money to give to him. while we would go without. No, John Africa was never, ever like that. He was genuine. He was true. Our first demonstrations were at the zoo, at the circus, at furriers, protesting the abuse and enslavement of animals. Because people are trained by this system to see animals as inferior to humans. Humans are the superior being, and MOVE is still trying to figure out where that came from, because animals have never done what humans done. Like, it became a thing back in the 60s and 70s to call cops pigs. Pigs ain't never did what cops do. Never. A pig would be insulted to be compared to a cop. A pig ain't never handcuffed nobody and blew their brains out, you know? And animals, no animal, no other species other than human have ever poisoned the air they have to breathe, the water that they must have to drink, the earth that feeds them. Ain't no animal ever poisoned, made toxic, what they can't live without. Ain't no animal ever did that. Humans have done that and continue to do that. Donald Trump said the climate situation is a hoax. It's a hoax, you know. It's crazy. The instant you see something as inferior to you, you feel like you have a license to do those things, to mistreat them, to abuse them, enslave them. That's why Africans were kidnapped from Africa, transported across the water, and enslaved, seen as inferior. Same thing that started with animals. Lions being kidnapped from Africa, tigers being kidnapped from India, and being transported across the water, separated from their mates, their babies, just like Africans, you know, and enslaved in these zoos. And you have people of African descent who complain about slavery, taking their children to the zoo and the circus and teaching them that that's entertainment, you know, that that's entertainment. Well, we had our first demonstrations there to correct that, to inform, you know, people of the truth of that. We also had demonstrations at unsafe boarding homes for the elderly that were nothing more than fire traps, and where the elderly were being mistreated, where their Social Security checks were virtually stolen from them. We exposed that, demonstrated that. We had demonstrations at the reservoir in Philadelphia, where our drinking water was coming from, but being poisoned, you know. We demonstrated against Dow Chemical, DuPont Chemical, for poisoning not only the water, but the air and the earth too. And we exposed them for poisoning our water and then turning around and manufacturing a water filter to make more money on something that supposedly was cleaning your water up, you know, giving you filtered water to clean. But the manufacturer of the water filter was still poisoning the environment, poisoning the water. So it was a trick. You know, you're going to make billions of dollars poisoning the water and then turn around and try to make billions more selling you something for $49.99 that's supposed to be cleaning up the water. That's what MOVE was doing in the beginning of MOVE, exposing those things. Simple one solution to the poison in our water. Stop poisoning it and let it run clear. Stop poisoning it. You can't add something to the water. You can't take something out of the water and still have the water that the God of life, the mother of life, put here for us. You got something else. But the only righteous, perfect water is what Mother Nature, the God of life, created. So we can back up what we're saying. They couldn't.
Why do MOVE members take Africa as their last name?
Several reasons. One, you have to start with John Africa. It's my understanding he took the name John Africa because John is common. The way John Africa would like to say is common as dirt, you know. And the name Africa to pay homage to the origin of life, you know, which is Africa. MOVE people take the name Africa out of reverence and respect for the founder of MOVE, the coordinator of MOVE, John Africa, and to make it clear that we are a unit, a family, you know, moving in one common direction. We're one revolutionary family.
Eventually, John Africa appointed you to the Minister of Information.
Communication.
What was required of the role, and were you ready for it?
I didn't have a clue what he meant when he told me I was Minister of Communication because I wasn't all that outspoken. I remember after I met Pam and I started coming around and her and other supporters would set up a microphone outside of City Hall 5 days a week during the trials and everything. And Pam especially would be on the mic a lot, and I would come down, I would bring her water, you know, I'd be listening to what she said and everything. But I wasn't a speaker, okay? And this one day, Pam was out there, she had the mic, she was talking to me, she said, I gotta go to the bathroom, here. And handed me the mic, and I was like, you know, I was looking at it, I'm like, oh my God. And she had, in her speaking on the mic, gathered all these people around. They, you know, had stopped, was listening to her, had gathered around. She gave me the mic. I start talking. Everybody start walking away. They start walking away. I was not a speaker, okay? The first interview I ever did was with Mumia, after I had gotten arrested in the case that Lynn Abraham presided over. Mumia came up to me. He didn't just stick a mic in my face when I came back to court like that next day or whatever. He spoke to me, started talking to me, and said, you know, he wanted to ask me about my arrest and everything. So I was kind of okay with that. But that was my first interview ever. And I was like very nervous and, you know, I never spoke out to officials, politicians, or at meetings. I never even wrote letters about an issue to an official. So, Minister of Communication, it was like, okay, if you say so. As things heated up and the media start coming out to Osage, I was coordinated to be the one to talk to the media. And I really didn't understand what my title meant until after May 13th. After May 13th, when the media was constantly asking me for interviews and when I would talk to people, even in the prison, I had the information to give them because John Africa had prepared me for that. You know, the information was right here. Then it dawned on me. Minister of Communication. Ah, I get it.
Well, you mentioned how pivotal that meeting with Mumia Abu-Jamal was to you. Well, here's what he had to say about you during that time.
Ramona Johnson sat throughout the long, hard-fought trial, and what she saw bore little resemblance to what she had been taught in law school. The trial both enraged and enlightened her, as she saw the law of the system perverted for political ends. And she learned of the teachings of John Africa, Move Law, which denounced the system's law as the way of the outlaw.
And you met him during the context of the Move 9 trial. Can you tell us more about that trial?
Oh, my goodness. I went into those hearings thinking that the courts operated one way. I saw, well, let me start with the judge and the prosecutor and those sheriffs and cops in there. I couldn't believe that they were conducting themselves the way they were. It was unbelievable. But then the flip side of that coin was I saw the Move 9 young sisters and brothers representing themselves in court based on the teaching of John Africa, not legality. Although Move people will point out contradictions in what an official is doing as opposed to what their law, their legality says it's supposed to be. But we represent ourselves, with Move belief. And I saw Delbert, Merle, Janet, Janine, Mike, all of them, confidently representing themselves, expertly bringing out and pointing out the contradictions in the prosecution witnesses. I saw clearly that they were not in the least intimidated by the judge or the prosecutor, or the cops and sheriffs in the courtroom. It was unbelievable to me, and it kept me coming back. I remember the day that what's his name, Judge Marachi, who was one of the judges presiding over some part of the pretrial hearings, and he would keep coming to court in the afternoon. Like in the morning, he would say, "All right, court is adjourned. We'll reconvene at 1:00." He would never reconvene till like 2 or 2:30. And people were organizing lunch hours or things they had to do downtown, so they could get back for the afternoon session. So this one particular day, me and 2 other people went up to his chambers. And surprisingly, he let us come in. He told the secretary, whatever, to send us in. And when we told him about it, look, if you're not going to start court in the afternoon till 2 or 2:30, then say that. Stop lying and saying you're going to start at 1, So he tried to get a little smart. He said, "Well, I could be down there in the courtroom now, but you're holding me up here." We said, "Don't even try it. We came up here because you weren't down in the courtroom," So we ended up leaving, going down, and then they started court. And this one day, it was I think it was a police witness on the witness stand, and a prosecution witness, of course. And Delbert, my brother Delbert Africa, was questioning him, cross-examining him. And he was getting him. Oh, man, he was exposing him, catching him in so many contradictions or whatever. And the judge kept trying to run interference, threatening Delbert with contempt, telling him he had to ask a question a certain way and all of that. And Delbert finally stopped and addressed the judge. He said, listen, I'm fighting for my life. I'm fighting for my freedom. You ain't intimidating me with no contempt of court. What I care about a contempt? And Delbert just went on. When he finished, not the cops, of course, not the sheriffs, but everybody else in that courtroom started clapping. Out of everybody in the courtroom, the judge singled me out. He said, you were clapping. Approach the bench. Well, then Delbert and Merle and all of them start getting with the judge again, saying, why are you trying to intimidate the spectators? You know, you mad at us. We're the ones on trial here. Why are you trying to take it out on the spectators? And he told me that I was disrupting his courtroom, and I could purge myself by apologizing to the court. I looked at him, I said, apologize? I said, I don't have anything to apologize for. You're the one that need to be apologizing, for what you're doing in this courtroom and blah, 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 blah. So he had the sheriffs take me into the elevator room because this was a security courtroom where the elevator came right down into. One of the people I was with, a woman named Diane, who had went up to his office with me, she stood up as they were taking me into the elevator room and said, well, I was clapping too, and you didn't, single me out. Why did you single her out? So he told her to come up to the bench and told her she could purge herself by apologizing. She wouldn't apologize. Next thing I know, she's coming into the elevator room with me. Then her friend that was with her, now these are two white people, Diane and her friend Lenny, right? He stood up and said, well, I clapped too. You didn't single me out. So the judge starts seeing things are getting kind of out of hand here. Mm-hmm. And I think it was Janine told him, see, you thought you was just dealing with move people, but everybody see how filthy you are. Mm-hmm. How, unbalanced you are, and she was getting with him. Well, he rethought what he was doing. He brought us out and said that he was holding us in contempt, but our contempt was we could not come back in his courtroom. And me and my big mouth, I'm like, your courtroom? This ain't your courtroom. This is the people's courtroom. How you going to keep the people out of the people's courtroom? Oh, God. So, like the next day, I ended up coming back. I just came back and almost got into the courtroom before the cops that search you and all that said, oh, wait a minute, you can't come in the courtroom. I'm like, well, why? Well, the judge said you couldn't come back. I said, but I'm asking you why. Well, we don't know. Well, if you don't know, take me in there so he can tell me. They arrested me. That is the charges I went before Lynn Abraham for. Yeah, but I was thoroughly impressed with the Move 9. I mean, the way they represented themselves, they were doing a superb job, because the judge ended up removing each one of the 9 from their own trial, 1 and 2 at a time, until they were all out of there, all out of the courtroom. Weren't allowed in their own trial.
Well, you ended up graduating with 2 degrees, an associate's degree in criminal justice and a bachelor's degree in political science. So your interest in those subjects probably grew from that connection to the law and legality.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. And I encountered Move through my sister Pam Africa, who was a supporter at the time in 1979. And once I really understood what was happening with Move, and I just got a little bit involved, you know, going to court, sitting in on the hearings, et cetera, being outside City Hall, you know, with Pam and other supporters, they were putting out information, I wasn't. I was listening about MOVE and what was going on in the MOVE hearings inside City Hall and everything. It was like I couldn't do anything else but adhere to and acknowledge what I was seeing, what I was hearing. This system, its representatives, particularly a judge named Lynn Abraham, who later became DA, is really responsible for me being in MOVE. She kicked me right on into MOVE because I had gotten arrested at a MOVE trial for nothing, really. And I went before her for, you know, the trial. And she convicted me, knowing I was innocent. And when I went back for sentencing, she asked me if I had anything to say before sentencing. And I had heard enough truth from MOVE by that point that I said, yes, I do have something to say. And I start talking about what I was seeing in these courtrooms and who the real criminals are. And I start talking about that. She told me to shut up. I said, well, didn't you just ask me if I had anything to say? And isn't this America where you tell the world that in America there's freedom of speech, freedom to protest, and freedom of religion, all these freedoms? She said, no, and I'm holding you in contempt. 60 days in the county jail. So she sent me for 2 months, 60 days, to the county jail, up close and personal with MOVE women. When I walked out of there after that 60 days, it was all over. It was all over. So I thank her. I thank her for her contempt citation. It kicked me right on into MOVE.
Right. We almost lost Philadelphia. Tell us about the days leading up to this event. Tell us about life on Osage Avenue, the street where you lived, on the days leading up to May 13th.
Well, we lived on Osage for several years. The cops knew our routine as well as we did. I mean, they were surveilling us for years. So they knew our routine. They knew us. They knew our kids. Now, the thing is, they came out there, Gregory Sambor, the police commissioner, came out to our home with warrants for 4 of us, me and 3 of my sisters and brothers. The warrants came out of a nothing incident that happened 2 weeks before May 13th. Our dogs were barking in our backyard. They were barking, you know, really bad. And so we looked out there to see what they were barking at. It was cops all around the back of our house. We turned our loudspeaker on, and for about 10 minutes, no more than 15, we told our neighbors that there were cops all around the back of our house. We didn't know what they were up to, but we knew they were up to no good. We weren't going to let them sneak in on us and, you know, our neighbors, the people in the neighborhood, not know what was going on. We were letting them know what was going on, and that was pretty much what we wanted them to know. 10 minutes, maybe 15 at the most. Turned off the loudspeaker. A few minutes after that, one of the surveillance cops that, you know, was regularly out there walked up our steps, knocked on the door. Me and my sister Teresa Africa, who was killed in the bombing. We come out, we talk to this cop, you know, maybe an hour or so. He stood there talking to us. The warrants that Gregory Sambor came to our house with in May of '85 charged us with terroristic threats and disorderly conduct for that day, what happened that day. What cop is going to stand up there on our steps talking to us for about an hour if we're threatening him, terroristically threatening him? You know? Mm-hmm. They went to Lynn Abraham, same judge, Lynn Abraham, went to her home on Saturday, May 11th, to get her to sign those warrants for them to come out there. Now, my question was, why did you go to her? Why did you go to her home? Well, she was the emergency judge. Yeah, well, what was the emergency? The warrants you got were for a situation that happened 2 weeks earlier, you know? So you can see it was all a setup. They had rehearsed, practiced how they were going to attack us for close to a year, if not more. Mm-hmm. Practiced blowing up a replica of our roof. That came out later, but they had done all that. They made this big to-do about planning the attack on us, planning to come out and kill us, because they never planned to arrest anybody for real. They didn't have to do all that. They had plenty of opportunity to arrest us. That's not what they wanted. That was not their plan. And people really need to understand that, because May 13th is the day that they dropped the bomb. But they came out there setting up their weaponry of war, planning to kill every living being in that house on Sunday, Mother's Day, May 12th of 1985. That's when it started. But anyway, the government uses the media to try to convince people that what happened on May 13th, the bombing, happened because neighbors complained about Moot. Now, all I want to know is, when has this government ever cared? When did they start caring about black folks complaining about their neighbors? When did that happen? You know, all you got to do is talk to those same Osage residents, or the few that refuse to move and live, you know, on Osage Avenue now. 31 years later, they're no longer complaining about move. They're complaining about the city and what the government is putting them through and has put them through for the last 31 years.
Well, we want to think about going inside of the bombing, right? The police department dropped a C4 military-grade bomb on Move. The bomb unleashed a ball of fire that was accounted for at 7,200 degrees Fahrenheit. Additionally, more than 500 cops fired more than 10,000 rounds of ammunition in less than 90 minutes into the house. Yet you were inside. Can you take us inside?
I can tell you some things. I can never reveal the strategy that, you know, we were given to protect us as much as possible. But I can tell you that we were in the basement, that the water from the deluge hoses, which was their first mode of attack against us, 4 deluge hoses that pump out 10,000 pounds of water pressure per minute. 4 hoses, so you're talking about 40,000 pounds of water pressure per minute. And it was just pouring down on us in the basement. We had to make sure the kids, you know, were all right and didn't get hurt by the water pressure. We had to make sure that, you know, we were protected as much as possible from the water. That was the first thing. Then the basement was filled with tear gas. The whole house was filled with tear gas. The thing is, the cops claim that they intended to blow 3-inch holes in the walls, party walls of our house on both sides, to insert tear gas. Well, when they finished what was supposed to be blowing 3-inch holes in the wall, the whole front porch of our house, the whole front of our house was blown away, was wide open. The tear gas came down in the basement, but we had a strategy to help protect us from tear gas. And then the bullets. I mean, so many bullets, it was unbelievable. You know, of course, we found out later that they admitted to shooting 10,000 bullets in our house. And if they tell you 10,000, come on, you know, you can probably double that. They had to send back to their arsenal for more bullets because they had used up all that they had brought out there. So that went on for a while. It was quiet for a while. Then we heard this. I'll speak for myself. Never in my wildest imagination did I imagine that a bomb was dropped on our house. We felt something, you know, and it was serious, but I guess I couldn't wrap my mind around a bomb being dropped on us. And so we were still in the basement. It was still pretty tear gassy, a lot of tear gas. But then the smoke was getting thicker. It was like, this don't seem like tear gas. This is something else. And then we heard the tree in the back of our house crackling. We found out it was on fire. And we were like, fire? That's what this smoke is. And it was getting hot in there. We said, oh, now we know what's going on. And we immediately tried to get our children, our animals, and ourselves out of that house. We were in the basement. We were toward the back of the house, so we were trying to come out. We were hollering. We're coming out. We're bringing the kids out. We're coming out, and we know they heard us. The kids were hollering. We're coming out. They're bringing us out. The instant we got to the door where we could come out, they opened fire on us. We were met with a barrage of police gunfire, which forced us back into this burning building. We tried again. Same thing happened. So now, you know, we're in a position where we're either going to get choked to death and burned alive or possibly get shot to death, you know, trying to get out of there. So the third time, you know, we try to come out, we're hollering. I made it out. I helped Bertie out. And there were people right behind us now. I can make it clear. There was no suicide pact or we're not coming out, all that crazy nonsense. No, no. They grabbed me. They grabbed Bertie. And they took me. I didn't see where they took Bertie. They took me to the police van. I was burnt all on my arms, down to my wrists, my back, but they handcuffed me. They put handcuffs on me, on my burns. And they took me to the nearest hospital, which was Misericordia. And, you know, I'm sure you can imagine at that point, I didn't want nobody even looking at me, let alone trying to do anything to me. I'm looking to see the rest of my family see, you know, other MOVE people coming in. No, nobody else came in. I'm like, my mind didn't even want to think, that there was nobody else. So they took my clothes and gave me hospital clothes, like bottoms and a top. Then they took me to 8th and Race, to the homicide unit. They actually contemplated charging me with the murder of my family. That's when I found out that my family had been killed, except Birdie. And they come to me asking me, who all was in that house? What's the names of people in the house? I looked at them, I said, you dropped a bomb on us and you don't know who you were bombing? Don't ask me who was in that house. You ought to know. I guess it was just a little too for them to go ahead and try to charge me with the murder of my family. They didn't do that. But they did charge me with everything that they did. They charged me with possession of explosives, arson, simple and aggravated assault, what is that thing? Conspiracy, risking and causing a catastrophe, endangering the welfare of others, something like that. Everything that they did.
Well, there's similarities in the experiences you describe with those of Ramsey Orta. We know he's the only person to have been imprisoned after the police strangulation of Eric Garner. There's the example of a Marley Graham who was killed in his Bronx home in front of his mother and grandmother, and it was his mother and his grandmother who were then detained and questioned for hours at the police station. Can you comment on the meaning of this for you and today?
All it really does is open my eyes even more to just how treacherous those running this system are. I mean, they have no shame at all. When I think about Veronza Bowers, Leonard Peltier, I mean, the case of Leonard Peltier just really makes my blood boil, that these, people running this country have the audacity to call Leonard a murderer when they have slaughtered Leonard's people into virtual extinction, and they're going to call him a murderer? When I think about this 15-year hit that Sundiata Acoli just got, and he's 80 this week, I mean, the audacity of these people running this system to get in our face and call us criminal. We would be criminal if we didn't resist these sick-ass misfits. Then we would be criminal. John Africa have taught me that it is criminal to abuse and oppress life, not just humans, but all life, the way these misfits do. And MOVE is not suicidal. We're not masochistic. We believe in the principle of self-defense, the instinct of self-defense that is instilled in all living beings, from the tiniest insect to the biggest species of life you can think of, is instinctive. And this system have robbed humans of the instinct of self-defense. But thanks to John Africa, ain't nobody gonna get in any MOVE person's face and try to convince us that we don't have the right to defend ourselves against this rotten system. Ain't nobody gonna do that. Nobody. We're not pacifists. You slap this cheek, you ain't getting the opportunity to slap this one. And I hope everybody has that attitude. And I hope more and more people get that attitude. How are you going to allow your enemy to tell you you don't have the right to resist them? I mean, how do you do that? How do you do that? Could Jews allow Hitler and his Nazi stormtroopers to tell them they don't have the right to resist the Holocaust? Could black South Africans allow apartheid, the apartheid regime, to tell them that they don't have the right to resist apartheid? I mean, come on, what kind of stuff is that? This system, those running it, have done a number on people, but it's past time that people wake the hell up. Wake the hell up and start putting their interest at heart, because this system don't have our interest at heart. It don't.
I see you grew into that position of Minister of Communication. I want to turn to your experiences in prison and how you sustained yourself, during that time.
I guess I'd have to say the most difficult time was my first year after May 13th, the year after that, for several reasons, because, I was traumatized. Anybody that tells you that they could go through something like that, but they all right, they cool in the game, they strong, I'm strong because of John Africa, but I'm also a living being. I'm alive. I have feelings. That means I can be hurt. My feelings can be hurt, okay? I'm not a robot, all right? So move people understand that. And the thing is, we can be hurt. We can be traumatized, but we won't be stopped. And that's what's important, I had never, ever went through anything like that in my life. It was traumatic. I was terrorized, okay? And I admit that. Anybody that tells you they can go through that and they're okay, they're either crazy or they're lying. One of the two, But the thing is, that first year, I had to really keep myself going, I wasn't with other MOVE people. I was in the county jail by myself. My family was all upstate. And, I did my own legal work. I had to file, paperwork and do my own case. That kept me busy. And then, it's shameful to have to say it, but I ran into several situations, and I know that the people I had to deal with didn't know what they was dealing with in me, because one situation was this woman in the county jail with me, and I think she was a little off, but she wasn't that off. And she was at the door to her cell. She was locked in for something, but, they would let her out. And she said something really crazy and foul about the bombing of my family. I didn't say anything to her. I went in my cell, put on my sneakers, tied my hair back, and I came out, and I was just sitting out there on the block waiting for them to let her out. I guess she picked up the vibe or something, because she didn't come out. She did not come out. But the fact that a young black woman, could have the attitude she had, say some foul stuff like that about men, women, babies, being burned alive. Look, it wasn't that long after May 13th, so I was still kind of, ready to fight. Then I remember one time during the same year in the county, I went out to the yard, and you could see the men's yard from our yard, and they could see over there. And these were young black men. I'm walking around the yard, then I heard something. I'm like, what is that? You know what they were singing? The roof is on fire. We don't need no water, let the motherfucker burn. I'm like, are they really saying that? Are they really saying that? You know, and I knew they were saying it because I was in the yard.
Right.
But it just really showed me how sick some of our people are. You know, because what happened that day was not just for MOVE. It was a message to all of us. And some people just didn't get it. They didn't get it. But I remember the psychiatrist in the prison. He was an older white man. He wouldn't send for me. But his assistant, a young black woman, he had her send for me. And I got the pass to come to, you know, the psych office. And I'm like, the psychiatrist's office, really? I went, and the woman says, hi, Miss Africa, how are you? I just wanted to check on you and see how you're doing. You're not feeling suicidal, are you? I said, suicidal? I said, no, a little homicidal, but not suicidal, no. You know, there's a few people I could take out and not have a problem with it, but suicidal, no. You know, but that was kind of my psyche then. I was ready to fight, and that's what kept me going. And then when I got sentenced and went upstate, you know, to prison, I was in the hole for 90 days. Then I got down into population after that, and I was with my sisters. They had broke Muncie prison. By the time I got there, I didn't really have, you know, no trouble there by the time I got there. So, you know, I didn't like being in prison, but they weren't going to make me leave MOVE just to get out of prison, just to go from minimum security, or no, not minimum, a more crystallized prison to a less crystallized prison on the street, because ain't none of us free. Ain't none of us free. So they weren't tricking us, me, or any MOVE people with that. They weren't tricking us with that nonsense, which is why the MOVE 9 is still in prison today, even though if they disavowed John Africa, said they was leaving MOVE, it was all over, they'd be out in a heartbeat, out in a heartbeat. They told me that I could have been out of jail after May 13th in 16 months. That was my minimum. But I ended up doing my max of 7 years because they told me the only way they would parole me is if I had absolutely no contact with MOVE, severed all contacts with MOVE. And that wasn't going to happen, ever. And the same with my family, the MOVE 9. They became eligible for parole in 2008. Each time they have seen the parole board, like 7 times now, the parole board denies them. They don't say because you won't leave MOVE, because they got beat down with that. They had to parole to other of our family members without that stipulation. But they're telling the MOVE 9 that they're denying them parole because they won't basically admit guilt. They say take responsibility for your offenses. You won't show remorse. Now, Move been telling them since 78 that they are innocent, that they didn't commit no offenses. The offenses were committed against them, you know? How you going to show remorse for something that you didn't do, you know? This is going on since I said like 2008. We're battling the parole board. And that's why my family, the Move 9, you know, are not compromising, even though they know they could be released from prison if they just submit, compromise, and give in. But they're not going to do that. And the longer these people keep my family in prison, the harder it's going to be on them, not my family. And that's despite the fact that some of my family members lost their babies in the May 13th bombing. They're in the hole in prison when they get word that their babies were bombed and murdered. We lost 2 of our family members, Phil and Merle, you know, during the last 38 years. But despite that, Move people, the Move 9, we just visited our sisters on Sunday. All of them, all of the Move 9 are stronger than ever, more committed than ever, you know. And while they would love to come home to be with family, while they obviously don't want to die in prison, they would do that. They would die in prison rather than compromise what they believe in, what they know is right. Now, you can't get no more committed than that.
You came out of prison into a changed world. The Move organization was still continuing despite all of the struggles and the attempt to wipe it out, its philosophy, its core meaning, its membership. When you came out, your friend journalist Mumia Abu Jamal had been incarcerated already for 10 years. He was facing execution. Once again, it feels like we're in an era of movement building, from Standing Rock, North Dakota, to Black Lives Matter, to Tahrir Square in Egypt, the fight against lead-poisoned water in Flint, the fight of incarcerated prisoners for water, for medical treatment. How can we turn this moment into a movement? How do we cohere these forces where we are now today?
It's really only one way that's going to happen. People have to get to the point where they acknowledge how treacherous this system is and that it is not in their interest to support something that's killing, literally killing them. And then they're going to have to release themselves from this system. They're going to have to accept that we got to let this system go. It's sick. It's killing us. It's deadly. We got to let it go. How can we hold on to this? It's not something that's going to happen overnight or that people are going to be able to do very easily, but it is necessary. It's the only way. People have to get to the point where they acknowledge what this system is doing to them. As long as they continue to believe in it, they ain't never going to let it go. And you're going to continue to see the self-destructive road that this system is on. And when we use that word love, I love my husband, I love my wife, I love my kids, you know, I love my mother, I love my father. That ain't just words. If you love them, if you love yourself, then how can you possibly tolerate what this system is doing to you? You wouldn't be able to tolerate it, you know? That's what John Africa really teachers move. The bottom line, one word, love. Love of life, true love. And that begins with love of self. Not in an egocentric way, but in a loving way. You know, the love that leads you to motivate you to protect yourself, to want what's right for yourself. Does anybody really want and have an urge for polluted air? No. You know, you want clean air. So why are you accepting a system that's polluting your water, your air and your water? You don't want water that tastes like who knows what. You want clean water. So why are you accepting a system that poisons your water and is forcing you to drink that poisoned water? Because if you think you're really getting, where's that word? If you think you're really getting decent water in a plastic bottle, think again. Think again. I mean, it may be the best you can get right now, but don't think this is the solution. It ain't.
Thank you. Well, this has been very powerful. There are close to 100 people in this room. Why should we go to Philadelphia on December 9th? Why should we gather everyone we know and go to Philadelphia on December 9th?
Because you should never, ever be a rotten merchant. Mumia put his freedom, his life on the line for the people, for you, and you would be a rotten merchant if you didn't do whatever you can do. Not more than you can do, certainly not less than you can do, but do whatever you can do for Mumia Abu-Jamal, with the understanding that it's not just for Mumia. It's for all of us. It's for all of us. Because the injustices that Mumia has experienced and is still experiencing to this day don't begin and end with Mumia. You know? The fight that we're waging for Mumia benefits everybody. Benefits everybody. Because one thing I can tell you about those running this system, they are so used to people flaring up for an instant and then fizzling out. That's what they're used to. I mean, you've had a lot of extraordinary examples. Million Man March, Million Women March, a lot of examples in this country and around the globe that were strong examples, but they happened and they're gone. And that's what those running this system bank on. All right, we just gotta hold tight, it'll pass, you know? And it usually does. We can't let that happen with Mumia. We can't let it happen with anything anymore. We don't have that luxury. We don't have that luxury. We gotta be ready to put ourselves in it for the long haul. For the long haul. So we can end our own suffering. You know, because people, life is suffering. Suffering. Now, do we want to put an end to that or what? If we want to put an end to that, then we got to be about the work and what's necessary to put an end to it. We can't just cry and moan and groan and complain about it. Words ain't going to get it. We got to put the work in. Plain and simple. Ain't no getting around it. Ain't no getting around it.
Well, Ramona, thank you so much for sharing your story. Thank you for your humanity, your revolutionary example, for firing us up and letting us know that we don't have to acquiesce, we don't have to be passive, and it's our responsibility to ourselves, to this earth, to our political prisoners, to keep on the move.
Well, long live John Africa, and thank you, Johanna, Jeff, Sophia, Rebecca, everybody involved in Inside the Activist Studio. Thank you. Okay.